Just a reminder that when we're in the romance phase, we idealize our partner. And you idealize in the sense that you base your reality on an idea in your own head. So I base my sense of the reality of you on the idea of you that's in my own head, an idea that has been formed by my own past, my own wishes, my own expectations, and may not necessarily reflect hardly anything about you. So I idealize until I realize. Now I base my idea upon your reality. And that is the conflict and commitment phase. Those are the conflict and commitment phases of relationship, which follow the romance phase. It would stand to reason then that to move from romance to conflict is an enormous shift in consciousness, since it moves you away from the world outside as your idea into the world inside having to realign itself, or rather align itself, to something alien to itself, namely your shadow, all your characteristics that annoy me, that I find distasteful, and so forth. So that's why the commitment can happen only after the romance. There can't be a commitment during romance because you'd be committing yourself to your own idea. It would have to happen after that had bit the dust. So, that's just a loose end from last time. Do we need to lower this one? Now, we also talked, this is another loose end, we also talked about the fact that there's an adult style in us, and there's also a childlike style in us, and these represent two voices in our heads about our partner. So for instance, after a relationship that didn't work out too well, one in which, let's say, your partner left you for someone else, the adult part of you says, don't keep calling, the phone is busy as he talks to someone else. You can't see him now, you have to let go. But there's a childlike voice inside, that's the needy child who hearkens to us all the way from birth, who says, but I have one more thing to tell him. And the adult might answer, he knows all he needs to know. Don't try to manipulate his views of you by what you might say. And the little kid answers, but without him, there's nothing in my life. And the adult will say, there's a lot more potential in you than you ever dreamed of. In fact, a lot of your potential was repressed by being in this relationship. And it will all be refunded to you now if you just stay with your program of grieving and letting go. To which the little kid inside will say, but I'll never find anybody else. After all, I'm too old, too ugly, too used up, etc. And the adult says, now having decided to become Buddha, at just the right time, in just the right place, just the right person will come along unsought without you having to seek or avoid. So anyway, this conversation goes on, and perhaps it's familiar to you in some way. And what's happening here is you're having trouble sometimes locating the adult voice. So the little needy child voice or scared child takes over, and that's obsession. Can't get this out of my mind at all. And there's no voice speaking to me except this needy voice. When that happens, turn to your friends. They will answer you in your adult voice because they're not charged and caught in your drama. So they'll be able to speak to you in an adult way. Not because they're more adult than you are, just because this is your turn to be crazy and their turn to be sensible. So, gradually you get to see that the adult voice in you wakes up. It has been rendered mute by all this neediness and all this fear. And gradually it starts to speak and engages in this conversation. And that's how the obsession starts to lift. Now, I want to say one more thing because it seems like it seems prejudiced or biased when we describe the two voices as child and adult. It seems as if, well, the adult is the part that we want to keep and the child is the part that we want to get rid of. That is not the case. This child part of us that's so scared needs to be held and cradled by our adult self so that instead of being so frightened, he will instead feel held and somehow reconstitute himself so that he too can act in your service. The wonderful thing about this child is he's the one with the imagination. He's the one who thinks up all these new concepts. And all your life, this little child inside has served as a kind of grief guard. He's guarding you against grief. He doesn't want you to feel the full onslaught of a loss. So he stays on duty as an artist of denial and compensation. And he tells you lies and makes up stories to entertain you and beguile you so that you won't think such a big loss happened. In other words, you'll let the loss in little by little, which is the only way that the human organism can let any loss in. And so he serves you in that sense, and always has, even in early life. He was the one who was telling you, your mother's not so bad, your father's not so bad, this situation is not so bad. He's the one who was pulling you through the painful, perhaps, the traumatic, perhaps, the abusive, perhaps, experiences of life, and somehow helping you survive. And doing this all with this wonderful imagination, but at the same time, defending you against feeling, that was the part that was not quite in our best interest. Because how can we learn how to tolerate and contain our own feelings if we are continually weaned away from them and protected from them by this mendacious voice? It would be hard to do, but at the same time, we have to make friends with this part of ourselves. So and reassure this part that now I am an adult and I can handle the losses with a little more expeditiousness than you imagine. So you don't have to say, but there is hope, but it could work, but he or she could change. You don't have to say that to me quite as much. You don't have to elaborate on that theme, because I think I can handle believing that there is no hope, that it won't work and that it won't change and can't change and he won't change or she won't change or can't change. I think I could really handle that. And I know you're trying to protect me, but I don't think I quite need it as much as I used to. So you don't have to gloss over and embellish the past. You don't have to inflate the present, and you don't have to brighten the future for me. Instead, you could simply work with me and help me locate my lively energy and my power in the midst of my loss. And how do I do that? By experiencing the feelings fully and then letting go of them. So I'm not trying to get rid of this wonderful creative child within, but I'm trying to come to an agreement, to negotiate a partnership which will be creative and lively. And instead of blanking out the child, I relate to him. The him being the part of my own imagination that believes it has to protect me from feeling. And what I propose as the way to relate to this other side from your adult is humor. So when the little kid says, yes, you should keep trying because she could change, then the adult will answer, yes, and the cow could jump over the moon. Or whatever you can think of that kind of, brings a little lightness to it. Because what you're doing is you're treating what's being said as a kind of quip, and you're trading quips, rather than taking it seriously, which will lead you into obsession. And then you say this, because we don't want to trivialize this part of ourselves either. And by the way, I know that you're trying to help me now, and that you tried to help me and did help me all my life, but I think I'm stronger than you imagine, and I needed you in childhood to be doing what you're doing now, but I don't need you quite as much now. And I'd love to see you try a new way of being, this time with me instead of to me. Everybody follow? Okay, any questions about that? Helps us see that we can make friends with all these pieces of ourselves that are attempting to console us, but sometimes overdo it. Now, last week we were on the subject, which I'll now come back to, of feeling loved in a relationship or by anyone or in friendship and so forth, in any context, and that you feel love the way you were originally loved. There is no objective way of feeling loved or objective way of loving. Each person feels loved the way he was originally loved, just as each person understands what's being said in the language in which he originally was taught. So this language of love is known to every cell of our body, but may not be known very well to our minds. Your mind may not quite have grasped what it really feels like to be loved. So I had suggested last week that you think about this week. Does anybody have any things that you want to throw out? Examples of how you feel loved? If you gave it some thought. I mentioned that mine was having someone stay with me when I'm not quite so entertaining, but somebody still is willing to be there for me. Roger?
Being read to as a kid.
Being read to, that's a good one, which is an attention. Being fed, okay. Other examples?
Being held with arms around you.
Being held, good. Handheld.
Little compliments and good night.
Little compliments, goodnight kisses.
Taking you everywhere.
Taking you everywhere with them. Yeah, that's the Italian way. Now, were there other ones that you wanted to throw out?
Being rocked.
Being rocked. Okay, great old idea. Yeah. Doing a project together. Being listened to. And all of these are very positive. So, what I want to distinguish, which we didn't have time to talk about last week, is that some of the ways of being loved, for instance, all the ones you just mentioned except being fed, are empowering. Examples of empowering ways of being loved are the ones you mentioned, plus, for instance, to prize me when I'm not a winner, to stay with me when I'm not so entertaining, to stand up for me, to give me credit, to wink at me in recognition that I'm okay, to be loyal to me, to notice and appreciate what I do, and still to love me in my worst moment. But what if the way that you have of feeling loved, instead of being empowering in this way, leads to your giving up your own power, such as to flatter me. I feel loved when I'm flattered. To praise or prize me for my looks. To make a sexual advance. I feel loved if someone makes a sexual advance to me. I feel loved if someone controls me or dominates me, tells me what to do. What if this is the way it came through? I feel loved when someone will fight with me. I feel loved when someone gives me approval, when someone pursues me. I feel loved when someone loved when someone hurts me. I feel loved when someone reacts to me. I can see that I upset you, so that shows me that you love me. In all of these, I'm giving up some of my power as opposed to being empowered. So I would want to look into myself, and probably most of us have entries on both sides of the list. We have empowering ways of being loved, and we also have disempowering ways of being loved. And the work would consist of looking for the place in ourselves where we could be satisfied with the empowering ways and start letting go of the disempowering ones. And, of course, to shun relationships in which only the disempowering ways are coming through. Everybody follow? And just one other point about this. Let's take my example. If my feeling loved is somehow related to someone staying, it would follow that if someone leaves, the abandonment that I feel will be greater than someone who doesn't have this on his list. Because for me, this is a highly charged area, already associated with feeling loved, which is the way you survive. Everybody follow? So what you want to do is you want to do this in your journal. Make your list, how I feel loved, the empowering, the disempowering. Then ask yourself, what's happening in my life right now that stimulates these, for better or for worse. But the adult task will always be to broaden, which I didn't say a few years ago, but now I understand better, to broaden the template of love so that I can accommodate more and more ways of being loved. That's the healthiest approach. Otherwise, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. So this expands my capacity to receive different kinds of love, and when you expand your capacity to receive different kinds of love, when you have more entries that you can choose from on your list, you become more loving in the process. That's the wonderful gift and paradox of it. So I still ask for what I want, but I combine that with accepting more and more, and of course always accepting approximations, and reminding myself that I have to examine my relationship, I have to palpate my relationship and ask myself honestly, do I feel loved, or do I simply know that I'm loved cognitively? Do I feel it in my body? Because remember, it's in our bodies that this information matters. It doesn't matter in our mind. It matters in matter, our bodies. And this is where that little imaginative kid will speak up and try to convince you that it doesn't matter that you don't feel it as long as you know that it's there. And there is right. It's there, not here. Not here in your body. Everybody follow? And of course, it could also happen that somebody is showing love in the best way that he or she can, but it doesn't quite make sense to you. And you can't really blame the person because he's showing love the way it was shown to him and hasn't yet learned how to mirror you. So this would be the equivalent of you're hearing Arabic and saying it's gibberish just because you don't understand it. Everybody follow? Later on tonight I'll talk about mirroring and you'll see what I mean. We'll go into this in more detail. Questions about this part? Yes. Well, his question is, how would you know how to display love in a relationship? Of course, you're going to display it the way you've learned, whatever your habit is in it. But I think the best way is to ask the other person. You would say something like, I have a certain way of loving, and everybody does, but I want to match the way I love to what you need. So tell me what feels good to you, and that's what I will attempt to do. And gives a disempowering. If the person says, well, what feels good to me is when you tell me what to do, and you pursue me, and you praise my looks. Your answer would have to be therapy. Because I'm not going to do that. I don't want to be with somebody who wants that. I want to be with somebody who wants the empowering things. No, when what's being asked is disempowering of the other person, you're acting in the best interests of love when you say, those don't sound like healthy ways to me, so let's bring this to a third party who will help us know whether it is or not, whether they are or not, and we'll kind of go from there. So I'll be glad to do it if I can be shown that it is a good way to go. Now, a parent's way of loving, for instance, may have been to give you things, so of course, and to do things for you. So on your disempowering list is that somebody do things for me and take care of me. Remember that some of this is unconscious, so you will just automatically manipulate your partner into doing things for you, secretly garnering the feeling of love, when actually the other person doesn't quite know what's going on, so it's not really a mutual experience, and you're trying to get him or her to prove his or her love without his knowing what the rules are. See what I mean? And ultimately, you won't. ultimately, I don't think that works. You'll find that it's insatiable, that you have to keep asking for more and more. Like all childhood needs that are mistakenly sought for fulfillment through an adult relationship. Now, if your main way of feeling love is exactly what the other person is doing, but you still don't feel loved, there's one other possibility. It could be that the other person does this out of his own need, and it isn't really a form of giving. Wise people who check in with their bodies, where our true wisdom is, will know the difference between being reached out to by someone who truly reaches outside himself and touches me, as opposed to being pulled in by somebody who can't reach out, only wants to aggrandize himself by showing you that he's giving you something. But you can see that it's not a real giving, because behind it is his own neediness. I'm giving to you so that you will stay with me, so that you will give back to me, etc. So does he stay with me loyally because of generous presence, or because of narcissistic neediness? That will be the question that arises. Okay, any final questions on this? Pretty simple. Now, we're on the subject of what it takes. We're going to talk about intimacy tonight, but we're first on the subject of what has to be in place before intimacy can happen. So this is the first thing, to know how you're loved, to realize that it's subjective, and so forth. Secondly, you have to be willing to run a risk, take a chance. And my definition of risk is you're not in control of the outcome. You don't know how it's going to work out. And I think it's okay to give away some of your power in a relationship. That's just the nature of it. There's plenty more to go around. Okay? Thirdly, it seems as if relationships are based on trust, but I don't agree with that. I think the parent-child relationship is based on trust, but an adult relationship can't be based on trust, because no one is trustworthy and truthful all the time. Everyone flexibly moves in and out in small or large ways within the experience of trustworthiness and treachery. So a truly adult relationship won't be based on trust. It'll be based on an unconditional flexibility that does two things. It receives trustworthiness when trustworthiness is given, and it handles in a non-punitive way treachery when that is what comes one's way. In other words, an adult relationship is based on my trusting myself that I will be able to receive your trustworthy moments, and I will be able to handle your untrustworthy moments without having to punish you. In other words, I have learned not to abandon myself, even if you abandon me. So I'm trusting that there are resources within me, and I'm using the same mystique that I use in my work on fear, as you recall from our last class, Freedom from Fear. I'm choosing to be defenseless. I'm defenseless against your treachery. I have run the risk of entering into this partnership and I'm defenseless against your hurting me. And that's okay because that's perfectly human. That's our vulnerability, which makes us more lovable. But at the same time as being defenseless against what you might do to me, I'm also resourceful. You'd have to have both here, not one or the other. I'm also full of resources. I trust myself, and so I can handle the treachery and receive the loyalty. See, when I trust these riches within, only then can I afford to be open. And when I demand that this be a relationship entirely based on trust, and I demand that I have to demand of you that you be trustworthy all the time, that could be a disguise. That could come from the imagination of the scared child within who doesn't want to have to face pain or grief, who doesn't want to have to face a loss. It might be an expectation that a partner would protect you against having to feel that. It might be your way of maintaining your fear. In this sense, the trust that you're talking about is really just the handmaid of fear. Everybody see how this works? See, this is very different from what we were taught. So when I demand trustworthiness, when I insist on a loyalty oath right at the beginning, I want a risk-free relationship, it has to be monogamous, you have to make a binding vow, I have to be sure that you're always going to be there for me, that you'll never betray me, that you'll always tell me exactly what's going on. Those all sound right, but it could be that those are the ways we have of protecting ourselves from having to feel. So I say, go in there defenseless, but always resourceful. So here we are, and it would be good for us to make some agreements with each other, such as, monogamy and so forth, for health reasons. But I'd just like you to know that I'm here as a defenseless person against whatever treachery you might decide to inflict upon me. And you see, the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to cover up and close up and make myself invulnerable and hard-hearted. I want to be a loving, open person with a heart that allows itself to be wounded and yet still survives and thrives and revives. And you see, I have something in me that restoreth my soul. And so really whatever you do will hurt me, but I have resources inside and I'll be able to handle that. So I'm not asking you for the moon, just that you be yourself, and we'll see how it goes. And of course, if what happens is a series of betrayals, then that means no commitment, and of course I won't remain with you. And if what happens is a series of trustworthy moments, then I'll be happy. And if we get a little bit of each, I'll also be happy with that, but we'll have something to work on. But I want you to know that I come in that way. I come in defenseless. I don't come in hedging my bets and feathering my nest. I don't come in asking you to polish my armor. I come in with no armor and no shell, and now let's see how you are with someone like this. Make sense? I know you've heard this over and over again in the course of your relationships. So, she's saying resourceful means return to the source. Good, I like that. Other comments? Yes, Mike?
You have an agreement, and the agreement is broken.
Well, that would be up to you in each case. I mean, you could say this one is big enough so that there has to be consequences, or you could say, well, we could kind of let this one go. I would see all of this being worked on in the context of therapy if one couldn't do this on one's own. But the word consequences is a little bit hard. I would rather say that we both take responsibility for what happens. I'd rather go with that than consequences, since consequences is somehow in the realm of punishment on a spectrum. What? No gifts for 1 year. That would be the consequence, okay? Or I won't cook for 1 year. Consequences might be feelings. Now, if the consequence is that you're going to hold a resentment, then that's a problem, isn't it? Resentire, to feel over and over again. You're going to keep feeling the anger over and over again. Now, I also want to say, just in passing, that betrayal seems to play a part in the human story of growth and transformation. How interesting. It seems that you can only, first of all, be betrayed by someone that you trust implicitly. I mean, that's the only real betrayal. Which means that betrayal happens in the context of love, caring, and trust. And that's where forgiveness happens. And it could be that forgiveness is such an enormous part of our spiritual transformation that the universe brings us betrayals so that we could forgive. Just as in the story of Joseph and his brothers, he was betrayed by his 11 brothers and sold into slavery. And of course, while being a slave in Egypt, he rose to a position of power and achieved his full potential and destiny through the betrayal that came from his brothers. And there's a very important moment toward the end of the story that fits for us. When the brothers were reunited, the 11 feared that Joseph was going to punish them for what they had done so many years before. They were worried about that. But he reassured them, and he said these words which give us so much good information about our nature as humans. He said, "What you intended for evil, God has turned into good." So there is no punishment. What you intended for evil, God has turned into good. So the betrayal that was intended for hurt or evil, through forgiveness, as he lived his life and achieved his destiny, he became bigger than such concerns as these, and he forgave them over and over again through the years without ever having seen them. When he finally did see them, he already had forgiven them. And that's what he means by my higher power, the power that is unconditionally loving and that lives in us and through us and above us and around us. That's the part that turned what was evil into what was good. But it happened through betrayal and forgiveness. So to move from the transpersonal spiritual source to the human result requires the passage through the straits of betrayal and the open gates of forgiveness. It seems that that's what we're like. In fact, Hillman says betrayal is the dark side of trust and forgiveness. He says, we must be clear that to live or love only where one can trust, only where there is security, only where one cannot be hurt or let down, where what is pledged is forever binding, means really to be out of harm's way and thus to be out of real life. And it does not matter what is this vessel of trust, be it therapy, marriage, the church, the law, or human relationship. Doesn't matter. When you get that much security, you're not living a fully human life. Because in a fully human life, you go through these kinds of experiences of betrayal and forgiveness and so forth, and that's how you become a person of character. Seeing Jesus on the cross betrayed like that, undeservedly, was the only final way to see the complete humanity, no longer the favorite son, but the forsaken, abandoned one, the one who was betrayed even by his own father. To see all the great heroes in all the stories go through this experience of betrayal, and to realize that they come to this place of forgiveness gives us information about who we must be, who we can be, how much we can be, how much more we can be. And relationship is the container or the vessel in which this alchemical process could take place. On that basis alone, it's worth giving a try. So a real adult is not trying to defend himself against pain. He accepts it as a condition of relating, just as it's a condition of existence. And we're not trying to have the light conquer the darkness, but we're trying to accept them both. As Jane Harrison says, it is useless to deny that evil exists. We must frankly face its existence, but refuse participation. Okay, any questions about this? So that's our preparation to talk about intimacy, which is our next subject. But any questions about this part? Problems?